Yo, what up? It's your boy STO back with another football video. So today I'm going to be predicting the NFC playoff bracket, and I'll start off with ranking teams 1 through 7. So as I said previously, the Saints will probably be the first seed. They're bringing back Drew Brees. They're going to have Michael Thomas. They're going to have Emmanuel Sanders. They're going to have Alvin Kamara. So they have a solid offense. They have the fifth ranked O-line, and their pass defense will greatly improve with the addition of Jenkins and his learning of the playbook. And then in addition, they went 13-3 last year, so they'll probably have a great season again. And they don't really have many line moving. So Cameron Jordan will still be there. Sheldon Rankins will still be there. So they have a great rush defense. Marcus Davenport will still be there. So they'll probably still be a top seed in the East. I definitely put them either to the 1 seed, and they might fall off to the 2 seed or 3 seed, but definitely at the top of the NFC. The second team, I would have the San Francisco 49ers. They finished first last year. They went 13-3. They don't have many pieces leaving. They don't have many pieces signing. Although they did lose Emmanuel Sanders, they do have other great wide receivers as well as George Kittle. And with Jimmy Garoppolo still growing into a quarterback, and defense that's growing as well with the veteran and Richard Sherman. They'll probably do great things this year again and probably compete with the Saints for the first seed. It might be new to see when the second seed won't get a bye. The competition really at the end of the season. That'll be a new seed. The third seed, I have the Cowboys. They have done terribly with the great talent they've had year in, year out. But I think this year with the firing of Jerry Jones, with the retaining of Dak Prescott, Zeke, Van Der Esch, D-Law, and Amari Cooper, they'll still be a top honcho of the NFC East and probably progress and actually do well this year now that they have a competent coach. The fourth seed, I have the Packers. I put them here because I still think that the NFC North is a weaker division. They went 13-3 last year, even though I feel like they should have gone 11-5 because the refs handed those 2 games against the Lions to them. Relatively, the Lions are a weak team. They're probably going to lose the majority of their games, probably lose again 2-0 to the Packers. The Vikings, although they might be a better team than I previously said in a previous video, I still don't think they have that playoff potential, especially with the absence of Stefon Diggs. He was a large part of either a defensive distraction or an offensive involvement throughout the year. And although Kirk Cousins might be severely underrated or severely more bashed by the media than he should be as a player, I still don't think they'll make the playoffs. If they do, it'll be as a 7 seed, and there won't be too much competition to Green Bay. For the 5th seed, I actually have the Buccaneers. So a lot of you guys had told me that I'm giving the Buccaneers too much credit for being an unproved team, but they ended last year on a hot streak, and they ended up going 7-9 with a quarterback that threw 30 interceptions, including multiple pick sixes to end games, especially the last one being a pick six to end the game. And I think with Tom Brady, they'll have a better offense. I don't think they'll be that great because now Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they will be able to be vertical threats because as Tom Brady ages, they're not going to have the same offensive movement. And although they do have a decent offensive line, Tom Brady's older. You saw what he did last with the Patriots. He wasn't making those solid throws to the back of the field, to the mid-third of the field. So I think they'll do well, but not as well as a lot of announcers say they will do. Then I have the Seahawks with the 6th seed. Even though their team is still in a rebuilding phase, I do think that Pete Carroll has done a great job managing the talent that they do have with the additions of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, both at wide receiver. Russell Wilson will still have a lot of places to throw, even when his offensive line is collapsing. In the recent years, they have progressed with their offensive line, although it's still terrible. It is ranked, I believe, like 27th in the league. Their defense is getting solidly better, even though they didn't have the best performance last year. They do oftentimes come clutch in big moments. So I'm going to put them at the 6th seed. This might be giving them a little too much hate, but I do believe they're a playoff team consistently year in, year out. So now a team you guys harped on in the last video was the Cardinals should be in the playoffs instead of the Eagles. So I did agree to put them in as a 7th seed The reason I initially was hesitant to put them in is because they often have a terrible defense. They have a terrible O-line. It's ranked 22nd, and the only team on this list that is in the playoffs and has a worse O-line would be Seattle. They have an underdeveloped quarterback who is developing, probably will turn out to be a great quarterback, but Kyler Murray. Then they've brought in another star wide receiver, but the problem last year was not that Kyler Murray didn't have anyone to throw to. It was because they had a terrible defense. They didn't have the greatest run game, and Kyler Murray was constantly getting sacked. So unless through the draft and through free agency they're continually able to draft offensive linemen, to draft a better defense, then maybe they can. But unless they make those major improvements and quickly, they won't be able to make the playoffs, in my opinion. The reason this time I put them over the Eagles is because of what you guys said in the comments, and as well as the Eagles do have tendency to be injury prone, and since their Super Bowl win, I do see them going on a decline. I just don't think they'll be as great as their talent says they should be. So now in wildcard weekend, so I'll obviously have the San Francisco 49ers beating the Cardinals. And I think this makes a lot of sense because Cardinals would be a fairly new team to the playoffs. The San Francisco 49ers do have Nick Bosa, who would cause the Cardinals' offensive line even more trouble than they normally had. He would continually pressure Kyler Murray, who at that point would be a sophomore quarterback. So still not completely developed, although he would be understandable. And they do have great corners in Richard Sherman and a couple other developing stars. So I just don't think that the Cardinals will be able to stop their defensive constant pressures. And if so, that does happen. This is where the Cardinals' awful defense really hurts them. The 49ers would have Jimmy Garoppolo, Kittle. They would have a couple solid wide receivers, although they might not be the best in the league. They would be solid. They're fast. They could beat the Cardinals down the field and on slant routes. And I think it would just be a terrible game for the Cardinals. And I think San Francisco 49ers would what with a blowout. If I had to predict the score, I would say it'd be either 31 to like 16 or like 28-19. A very large point differential. So now going on to the 3 versus 6 seed game. I just can't see the Cowboys making it much farther this year because they continuously choke. They haven't really given people much reason to believe why they can be a better team in year out. Even though Jason Garrett was fired, I don't think he's the sole reason of why the team was lacking. I think he is one of the attributing reasons, but due to their consistent performances of not meeting up to it, Dak's standards of not really beating those high-powered teams, only really beating the low-powered teams. And even though Dak statistically does play well against great teams, it's often because the Cowboys will get hammered, they'll get blown out, and then that third and fourth quarter, Dak will just go all out. He'll score those 3 touchdowns, he'll rack up those yards, and so at the end of the game, he looks like a great quarterback with great QBR. But in reality, he just stacked when the Cowboys were losing, and that's why he ended up having great statistical games. And even though the Seahawks are not a great team, I can see Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll really motivating this team and possible free agents they sign, whether they're veterans or whether they develop the young players they have currently on their team. I think they'll be able to beat the Cowboys and work into their playoff spot in the divisional round. Now, the game between the Packers and Buccaneers, personally, I believe that the Packers are vastly overrated. They should not have gone 13-3. In fact, the best record they should have gotten was an 11-5. They had a tremendously easy schedule last year, and Aaron Rodgers, has been consistently declining last year. It might have just been an off year. He might rebound this year, but there was a lot of issues between him and Matt McCarthy that were not solved with him and Matt LaFleur. Even though Matt LaFleur benefited the entire offense from a running game and wide receiver standpoint, I just don't think Rodgers has it in anymore. Maybe he's getting a little too old for the game, or there's a possibility where it was just an off year. But using last year to predict this year, I do think the quarterback will be significantly lacking, especially with the Buccaneers having Vita Vea and Shaquille Barrett. I think they'll be able to shut down the running game pretty well and the shallow passing game. So I think the biggest threat to the Buccaneers defense would be Devontae Adams because he is a pretty good wide receiver. But if it's really only one player they have to worry about with the declining Aaron Rodgers, I'd put Tom Brady with Mike Evans and Goodwin over the Packers team. moving on to the divisional round. So the Saints being the scores I would predict for the 6 versus 3 game, I think it'd be a lot closer than the 49ers game. I would say it would be about either like a 24-21 game, last second field goal winning, or like a 27-24 game. And for the Packers versus Buccaneers, I actually do think it would be more of a low scoring game. I think it might even be like a 17-14 game or a 20-14 game. I think it'd be a pretty close game. So now going into divisional weekend, you would have the Saints facing off against the Seahawks, and you'd have the San Francisco 49ers facing off against the Bucks. I do believe that the Saints will beat the Seahawks. They have much better offense. Drew Brees would have two great receivers with the fourth ranked offensive line and a solid running game between Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara. And he has the best wide receiver in the league statistically, and probably the best wide receiver in the league, and Michael Thomas, and a great wide receiver in Emmanuel Sanders. While Russell Wilson would only have two great receivers with the declining offensive line that's not really showing much promise against, you would have Cameron Jordan, you would have Davenport, you would have Sheldon Rankins, and they just have a great defense overall, especially in the zone with Von Bell, their linebacker core, and Demario Davis. So I think the Saints easily win that game. I would say, with the Saints' tendency to often give up late leads, I would actually put it closer to like a 28-24 kind of game, or a 31-30, 31-28 kind of game. Now moving on to the 49ers versus Buccaneers. I think with Tom Brady's declining status, he is a great quarterback. A lot of people say he's a GOAT. In my opinion, he's not. But I do admit he's definitely a top 3 quarterback in the league, or top 3 quarterback of all time. But I think with the 49ers have a younger team, a much better defense, especially pass-wise. The San Francisco 49ers won't need to rely so heavily on the rush. Jimmy Garoppolo will develop and learn from his Super Bowl mistakes, and I think they will edge out the Bucs. I think the score will be in the, again, 20s. I think Tom Brady will have to play a high-powered game against San Francisco 49ers team. So I'd say it would be a 24-21 game again. But I would say it's a close game, fun game throughout. So the Saints versus 49ers game. This is a very exciting regular season game when it happened last season. And I think, contrarily to what happened, the Saints being at home again and Sean Payton having a playoff mentality, I do think the Saints take this game. I think comparatively, Drew Brees is a much better quarterback than Jimmy Garoppolo, still at this point in his career. Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders are much better than the wide receiver and tight end core San Francisco has. And Jared Cook is coming back to be a solid vertical threat for the Saints. And I do think the Saints still have a better rush block. Although the 49ers do have Nick Bosa, you have the Saints with Cameron Jordan, Marcus Davenport, and Sheldon Rankins. So I think overall the Saints are a better team. And if they play the game properly, if they game manage, they don't let the game go out of hand, it'll be a great game. And since it is later in the year, I won't expect like that high of a score. I don't think it would go into the 40s like it did last time. But I do expect it to go into like the 30s. I would say like a 35-32, 34-31 kind of game. So that's what I expect. I think the Saints will be the NFC champions, and I think they will face off the Kansas City Chiefs, who will win in the future bracket of what I'll put the AFC playoff bracket. Thanks, and you guys will have a new video tomorrow. See you next time.